All right, guys, so there has been an explosion of liberals claiming that Trump stole the election, that MAGA rigged it. I'm going to walk you through the various theories here and then give you my take on it. So let's start easy. Let's ease into it a little bit here. This part is not controversial. It was reported all throughout the day on election day. And it's kind of interesting to me that this hasn't been discussed more. It's kind of wild that we had bomb threats in Democratic precincts all over the country. And I think in Georgia alone, there were 60 bomb threats in majority black districts. So look, that is on its face, that's an attempt to suppress votes, right? And how many people didn't vote because there was a bomb threat and then they didn't get back to it later, right? So let's watch this little clip from PBS.
The ever-optimistic Lisa Desjardins. Miles O'Brien is back with us. Miles, I understand that as part of your reporting, you've put together that there were some 60 bomb threats, not credible bomb threats, but bomb threats nonetheless, that were called in to polling sites across Georgia. Is that right?
Yeah. 60 bomb threats, many of them attributed, we believe, to Russian sources. None of them turned out to be anything, but it did gum up the works here a little bit. But, you know, Jeff, I think the takeaway story here from Georgia is despite all of that, this was a pretty smooth election.
So, again, I think that's a big deal. It wasn't just the state of Georgia. It was other states as well. And you got to think, how much did that suppress people turning out? Majority Democratic precincts where this happened. If the roles were reversed and it was bomb threats at majority Republican precincts, you bet your ass Republicans would never shut up about it. And they would use that fact alone to say the election was rigged. They stole it from us. So that's thing number one. Now, let's graduate a little bit here. So this is a clip from Rachel Maddow's show before the election. Okay. And I've actually played this clip for you before. And I played this clip for you in the context of there were 70 MAGA election-denying officials who are in positions of power to certify the votes in the various swing states. And the concern leading up to it is, regardless of what the outcome is, they're going to claim there's fraud and there's a problem and we are not certifying Kamala Harris as the winner in these various swing states. So that's the context of this clip that you're about to see. But there's an interesting thing Trump kept saying on the campaign trail leading up to the election that now in retrospect, liberals are looking at this and they're going, that's weird. Watch this.
Let me also point out something more strange, which has been happening at the same time and it hasn't had as much attention. The day before Trump made those remarks on Friday he said, you're never going to have to vote again after you vote for me this one time. The day before that, on Thursday last week, he didn't say that people wouldn't have to vote anymore once he was elected this November. Now, the day before that, on Thursday, he told his supporters, not that they're not going to have to vote again, but that they don't have to vote this time, that they don't need to vote for him this November.
My instruction, we don't need the votes. I have so many votes.
My instruction, we don't need the votes. I have so many votes. He said that on Thursday last week. And it turns out this is something, when you look, he says this all the time now. Watch.
My instruction, we don't need the votes. I have so many votes.
We don't need votes. I tell my people, I don't need any votes. We got all the votes we need. I don't need votes.
We don't need votes. We got more votes than anybody's ever had.
You don't have to vote. Don't worry about voting. The voting, we got plenty of votes.
Don't worry about voting. Of all the weirdness around this campaign, this is a truly strange thing to tell people, right? Don't vote. I don't need your vote. I don't want your vote. I mean, all the surface level weirdness is, worth noting.
So she goes on to show even more clips of him saying that over and over and over and over. So now liberals are looking back and going, why would you say that like 1,000 times leading up to the election? All right, now we're going to go one layer deeper. One of the claims that's being made by liberals is there's a Starlink conspiracy theory about how Elon Musk had Starlink placed over the swing states while the votes were being counted. And then there was one Starlink satellite that crashed and burned after the fact. But they're claiming Starlink was used to mess with the vote count and give it to Trump, basically. That's the gist of what they're saying. There's also some people on TikTok, liberals on TikTok, who are they're like astrologer types, and they're making arguments about how this is not over yet. It's not over yet, bro. But to the Starlink point, here's Joe Rogan telling a story after the election about what Elon Musk was allegedly doing on election night. And again, this is one of those clips that liberals are now looking at and going, huh, that's weird. Here we go.
Apparently, Elon created an app, and he knew who won 4 hours before the results. So as the results were coming in, 4 hours before they called it, Dana White told me, Elon was like, I'm leaving. It's over. Donald won. He just fucking somehow or another.
I'm going to go back into my pod and evaporate.
I don't know what he's getting, where he's pulling his data from, but he had like the most accurate data in terms of the rural states hadn't put their results in yet, but yet Trump was ahead in these states. Kamala's never going to win those states, so tabulated that and like put it all together. I don't know how he did it. But
yeah.
Dana, I haven't even talked to Elon about this. I don't know like the Dana translation, but Dana said he had an app and he was like showing him. He's like, it's over. He fucking left. Dude just left.
It's over. John Jones won. Just saying that.
He just fucking left.
So, according to Dana White and Joe Rogan, 4 hours before the results, he already knew. Okay. So here's a clip from TikTok that gets a little bit into not the Starlink portion of the conspiracy, but just the general conversation about, was the election rigged? Here we go.
Was the election stolen? Let's go ahead and get into this, and please watch the full video or else you're going to miss important information. So a lot of people are not happy with the outcome of the election. I'm certainly among them, but that has also led people to look at this and say, this doesn't make sense, and they think something nefarious happened. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, she got about, 10 million votes less than Joe Biden did in a year when we had record registration for voting. I mean, Taylor Swift put out a post and almost crashed the voter registration page from people going there. There was so much traffic. She told people to vote. Beyonce told people to vote. We had record turnout in early voting. We had record turnout at the polls. And yet somehow, a ton of people didn't vote from this information. Then, in addition to that, after the election, we started seeing videos pop up like this.
I checked the status of my ballot, and it says I never voted, which is really weird, because I definitely voted.
Tell me why my ballot was rejected. I was properly registered to vote. I turned my ballot in exactly perfectly. I even checked with an election official at the drop box.
Where's my vote? Where's my ballot? Because my husband and I both went on election day in person. They don't have a record of my vote.
A lot of posts like that going up. I've had no less than 30 people reach out to me, some who I know personally, telling me that they checked and their vote was not counted, and that is a problem. And then when you see threads like this one, talking about how you could go in if you had access to the code and change the code and implant. And remember, last election they said it was stolen, and they reviewed the machines and they got access to the machines and they tested if they could be hacked, and then they hacked them and had access to the code. So all of this combined starts to feel very, very fishy. But honestly, what would it take to hack an election? I mean, it would take like a foreign power that wanted to disrupt our election, someone who wanted Donald Trump to win and didn't want Kamala Harris to win. It would take them collaborating with, like, I don't know, a James Bond villain-esque tech billionaire who also had a vested interest in controlling the outcome of the... Oh! You mean something like this? It would take something like this. And all of this is very compelling, but we also have to be real. This is all anecdotal. And if we're going to form an informed opinion, we have to look at all the information available. And when we look at all the information, there's a few harsh realities that seem to contradict this anecdotal evidence. One, polling going into the election and the election results is like scary accurate. Like the polling really does seem to match, especially in swing states.
It was a little more pro-Trump than most of the pollsters let on, right? I looked at the predictions of all the different polling outlets, and I want to say like half of them had Trump winning, half of them had Kamala winning, but only like maybe one had Trump with as big of a margin in the Electoral College as he ended up winning by.
More importantly, though, the exit polling matches the results that we have. Exit polling exists as a way...
See, that... I don't know about that, because remember when the exit polling came out, we did a segment on it, and it got like 500,000 views. And the number one issue, seemingly across the country, was democracy. Like voting to protect democracy. Now, the way I interpreted that, and many other people interpreted that, was, oh, so the Democrats' main argument of like, this guy's an authoritarian, he tried to overthrow the last election, he did the fake elector slates, he did January 6th. I looked at that as, oh, this does not look good for Trump. But turns out Trump won, so then it looks like maybe some of the people who cited democracy as the reason for voting, in their minds, they were like, well, Kamala Harris didn't win the primary, and it's very undemocratic that she's even running, and she's the nominee for the Democrats, and I think Trump is going to save democracy, or they think like, oh, all the lawfare and political persecution of Trump is anti-democratic, and that's why I'm going to vote for Trump, right? Like, it's possible people interpreted it like that, and Republicans successfully flipped the argument back on Democrats. Or if the conspiracy theorists are right, then it's like, yeah, hold on. Democracy was the number one issue. That should cut pro-Democrat, but it didn't? Okay, let's keep going.
For us to spot some sort of voter fraud or something that happened, if it's more than 2 points difference, I think that's grounds for an investigation. It matches. The exit polls match the results that we got. And I really, really don't think you could hack the exit polls. I mean, even hacking our election system.
Oh, I guess he's talking about the exit polls, like the actual, like, who did you vote for exit polls. I actually didn't see any of those, but I was referring to the issues-based exit poll as like, what was your main reason for voting?
Is a mess. All these different states running it different ways with different systems, and some online and some not, and it's a whole thing. It seems that the reality, unfortunately, is just that a bunch of Americans bought his bullshit and voted for him again.
So I showed you this video because I feel like this guy tried, like, you know, gave like almost a both sides argument here to try to break it down for you. All right, but now let me get to what I think is actually the biggest piece here, which is, first I'll show you this video. This is Steve Bannon interviewing Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas. And this is Ken Paxton admitting that back in 2020, he did something that should be illegal, that basically flipped Texas for Trump, and that, according to him, he thinks Biden would have won Texas if it wasn't for his actions as Attorney General. Listen to this.
It's certainly critical to my state, and that's why we fought off these 12 lawsuits. We had them in Houston, we had them in San Antonio, we had them in Austin, we had them in the counties where you'd have the most liberal judges. And it was a concerted effort nationally with lots of money going into it. And just knowing that we had 12 lawsuits that we had to win. And if we had lost one of them, like if we lost Harris County, Trump won by 620,000 votes in Texas. Harris County mail-in ballots that they wanted to send out were 2.5 million. Those were all illegal, and we were able to stop every one of them. Had we not done that, we would have been in the very same situation. We would have been on election night. I was watching election night, and I knew when I saw what was happening in these other states that would have been Texas. We would have been in the same boat. We would have been one of those battleground states that they were counting votes in Harris County for 3 days, and Donald Trump would have lost the election.
So what Ken Paxton is saying here is, I waged lawsuits as the Attorney General of Texas. I waged a bunch of lawsuits to try to get mail-in ballots thrown out from majority Democratic districts. And what he's saying is, I won those cases. If I didn't win those cases, those mail-in ballots probably would have been enough to flip the election for Texas in 2020 to Biden. That is an astonishing admission. So now this is back in 2020. It's a clip. I don't know why more people don't talk about this clip. This clip is astonishing. This is basically like, even though Republicans scream that Democrats rig elections all the time, this is Ken Paxton, the Republican Attorney General, admitting he rigged an election in Texas in 2020. But that brings me back to 2024 to what I would argue is probably the most highfalutin argument for fuckery and trickery on the right that I've seen so far. So Greg Palast is a legendary independent journalist, and he's forever been on top of this kind of stuff, right? These sort of stories about elections and voter suppression and things of that nature. And I'll just let this clip here speak for itself. So here's Greg Palast on Mark Thompson's show, and he gives his take as to what went down in this election.
For me, there are a lot of different ways in which the people's voice is suppressed. The latest conspiracy theories that have been associated with Elon Musk involve the technological reach, essentially, of Starlink manipulating data, etc. The tried and true way to suppress the people's voice is by making it harder for them to vote. And voter suppression has been taken to a high art in many of these states, like Georgia, for example, is just probably head of that parade. And when it comes to talking about that and the ways in which voter rolls are shed of Democratic voters in this case, that's the, as I say, tried and true, baked in way.
And, you know, here's the thing is that
of Democratic voters in this case, that's the, that and the ways in which voter rolls are shed of Democratic voters in this case, that's the, as I say, tried and true, baked in way that you can, conspiracy theorists, you can sink your teeth into a narrative. And the guy who is without peer when it comes to bringing light to voter suppression, the aggressive shedding of voters from the voter rolls, is this guy right here. So glad we got him. Love his books. I love his reporting. I love his latest movie. How about it for Greg Palast, everybody? Greg, what a week you had. I know you were really doing some real-time reporting on what was happening with voter disenfranchisement. Can you give us an update, on what happened a bit? Just bring us up to speed, and then where that all stands now.
Well, Mark, it involves millions of voters. I mean, I don't think we understand in America how much what we politely call vote suppression, which is a fancy word for saying screwing people of color out of their vote, which is what it really comes down to. So, and I'm talking millions of votes. For those who don't know me, Greg Palast, I'm a reporter for BBC Television and the Guardian newspapers out of England. And one thing we do in BBC is that when we announce the vote, we say so many, 1,000 votes for Labor, 1,000 votes for Conservatives, and then we say how many votes weren't counted. Well, we don't do that in America for good reason, because the number of votes we don't counted is in the millions. And so, for example, so I have just put out a film, Vigilantes, Inc., America's vote suppression hitmen. Now, we have an organization called True the Vote, which is backed by Donald Trump. They did the film 2,000 Mules. He released it from Mar-a-Lago. He's been a big promoter of their work. But what people don't know is their main work is to challenge the right of voters to vote. Now, this may sound odd, but in America, unlike every other developed country in the world, anyone can challenge the vote of someone else in 43 states. This is left over from Jim Crow. So for example, in Georgia, we had one single woman, a Republican operative working for Marjorie Taylor Greene, one single woman challenged 32,000 voters. Another Republican official is the Republican chairman for in Southern Georgia, a guy named Alton Russell. He personally challenged 4,000 voters. Now, who are these voters? Almost all of them were black soldiers out of Fort Benning, Georgia, where he's chairman of the Republican Party there. One is named Gamaliel Turner, Major Gamaliel Turner. Now, Major Turner, yes, there's that film, Vigilantes, Inc. Major Turner was waiting for his vote. He was assigned to a base in California. There he is at Fort Hueneme in front of one of the jets there. He was assigned. He's 70 years old, career military, African-American, and he was assigned to California. And so this Republican Party operative challenged his vote and 4,000 others, almost all of them black soldiers out of Fort Benning, Georgia. This is no joke. Now you'd say, well, okay, that's a few votes. No, it ain't. True the Vote, as of August 5th, had already challenged 852,000 citizens. Now, these aren't government officials that are doing the challenging. These are individual vigilantes, self-proclaimed vote fraud hunters.
So just to put that in perspective for you, what he's saying is True the Vote, this right-wing operation that brought us Dinesh D'Souza's 2,000 Mules, where the whole claim is Democrats rigged the 2020 election. What Greg Palast is saying is that group, True the Vote, as they scream Democrats are rigging elections, part of their operation, the bulk of their operation, is to challenge provisional ballots from majority black districts and get those votes thrown out. It's the most ironic thing of all time. As they are claiming Democrats rig election, part of their operation is to try to rig elections for Republicans. Okay, keep going.
And this is your point.
They challenged altogether by election day. They challenged, as my producer Martin Sheen says, they challenged 2 million voters. This has not been reported on. The New York Times, Washington Post did some little stories about, oh yeah, there's these challenges there. If you're watching this on your, not just listening, but there is a woman in a red dress, Republican Party official, who personally challenged 32,000 people. I'm showing her a photo of a black woman, a neighbor of hers, who she challenged 32,379 voters. That's just the beginning.
And so it's perfectly legal. Yeah. And that the way we're set up, that's perfectly legal. That one person.
It may be legal. I mean, here's, according to the NAACP, Gerald Griggs, the president of the NAACP, is in my film. And by the way, you can download my film, or you can stream my film, Vigilantes, Inc., America's New Vote Suppression Hitmen, at gregpalast.com or saveyourvote.org. So go to gregpalast.com. You can stream it for free. Thank you, Leonardo DiCaprio, who made this available for free.
I mean, it's a great movie that showcases your reporting, and there's going to be a link to it under this video and under the show as well. Yeah, so go ahead.
So that's just one way. 2 million voters were challenged. 2 million, almost all of them voters of color.
But explain to us, Greg Palast, what happened. So they're challenged. How do they end up in a trash heap?
Well, this is what happened. Okay, first of all, you have to understand, you think, well, what the hell is this? These people aren't government officials. Who are they to challenge voters? Well, we have leftover Jim Crow laws. Last time this mass challenge of voters was occurred was 1946. 1946. That's more than a half century ago, when the Ku Klux Klan mounted a challenge of almost all the black voters of Georgia, and they elected a Klansman as governor. Now, here's the interesting thing. At that time, in 46, the Justice Department and the FBI moved to indict the governor of Georgia, who had won his election. He was a Klansman who won through this trickery of challenging voters. And they were about to arrest him, but he drank himself to death just before the FBI arrived to handcuff him. Now, here's the weird thing. That was 1946. It was considered illegal by the Justice Department in 1946. And yet the 1946 Klan plan became the Trump plan of 2024. And nothing has happened to stop this. That's just one of the ways that vote suppression has worked here. And I'm telling you, that was 2 million votes. Now, what happens when you are challenged? Either you walk away and say, well, I don't have the right to vote. You show up to vote. And by the way, if you've mailed in your ballot, it won't get counted. About 60, I want to emphasize this. This is not small. About 60% of the American public votes early or by mail. Over half the American population votes that way. You mail in your vote and you've been challenged by a vigilante, you won't know it and your vote goes in the garbage. If you show up to vote, they may hand you something that they call a provisional ballot. Now, what is a provisional ballot? I call it a placebo ballot. The lady behind the desk says, oh, just fill out this form and your ballot will count. And they'll go through it, find your registration, your ballot will count. No, it won't. If you're not on the registration rolls, you're not on the registration rolls, and you can fill out 92 provisional ballots. They won't count. They won't count.
I did not know that. That's extraordinary. I've had that happen. I filled it out where they didn't because of some glitch in the system. Because I
if
changed
you did, your vote didn't count. Your vote went in the garbage, my friend. So here's what happened. Here's what happens with a provisional ballot. According to the United States Elections Assistance Commission, which is our federal agency which tracks these things, 4 years ago, there were 10 million people shunted to provisional ballots. 10 million, like you. 2.7 million. 1 out of 4 of those ballots, more than 1 out of 4 of those ballots, 2.7 million ballots, almost about a third, were never counted, thrown in the garbage, thrown in the dumpster. 2.7 million voters. Now, here's the interesting thing, Mark. If these were illegal voters, why don't you arrest them? You know, if I rob a bank, they don't close my bank account. They put me in prison. So if someone, now voting illegally, if you've registered to vote illegally, if you know, like they claim that there are aliens voting and people swimming the Rio Grande to vote for Kamala Harris, whatever, that, if that's true, then arrest them. I'm not in favor of vote fraud. But you know how many other 2.7 million people were arrested for illegally attempting to register a vote? Out of 2.7 million, how many do you think were arrested for that crime of illegal voting?
I know the answer because I know your stuff. Yeah, it was 1.
0.
Right? Oh, 0. Well, didn't they find 1? Somebody from Austria or something? Greg.
Oh, yes. There was about back 8. It was 12 years ago. 12 years ago, there was in Florida. There was one Austrian who registered as a Republican and voted in 2008.
Yeah, illegally, right?
Voted illegally for McCain. So there was one single voter, a Republican. That was it from Australia. Out of, again, in 4 years ago, it was 2.7 million voters rejected for voting illegally. All you have to, hey, I'm just asking you to find 2 of those people who voted illegally. Instead, now, if it were random, by the way, Mark, if it were random, sure, hey, who would care? But the truth is, if you're Black, Hispanic, Asian American, your chance that you will be shunted to provisional ballot is 300% higher than if you're white. And if your ballot is ultimately rejected for some reason, if you're Black, the chance your ballot will not count. We don't talk about this in America. Ballot's not counting. The chance of your ballot being disqualified is 700% higher if you're Black than if you're white. That's the official government figures. So we're not talking about a few votes. We're talking about millions. Now, did that flip this election? I got to tell you, for those watching on TV, on your video, I've got this fedora on, which indicates that I'm an investigative reporter, and I cannot report unless I've investigated. I'm trying now to get the numbers of ballots that were rejected, of the people shunted to provisional ballots in each state. It's just very, very difficult. I can tell you right now, when I'm at BBC, we tell you how many ballots were not counted. In America, we keep that secret because in Britain, it's a couple hundred in the entire nation, a few hundred in the entire nation where ballots were unreadable and spoiled. In America, it's millions and millions. So I just told you 2.7 million provisional ballots were thrown in the dumpster. We got about 1.5 million ballots. About 1.5 million ballots, what they call spoiled. Now, Mark, you don't spoil a vote by leaving it out of the fridge. You spoil a vote because they say it's unreadable. Again, If you're black, it's 700% more likely your vote will be in that spoilage dumpster. And it's not a small amount. It's about 1.5 million votes. We also have the massive purge of voter rolls. There are about 24 million people who were removed last year, in the last couple of years, purged from the voter rolls. Now, some of those are dead. Some have moved. Some have changed. But I got to tell you this. In Georgia alone, when they removed 500,000 voters from the voter rolls, I asked Amazon. And remember, Amazon knows where you live, Mark. You don't get someone else's tidy whities. Right. Mark Thompson is a common name, but you know that you don't get someone else's stuff. They don't get yours. And so Amazon knows where you live. They use 1,800 data points to make sure that you live where you live. So I asked Amazon, the Palast Fund, their experts, if they would go through the list of 500,000 voters removed just in Georgia. And they gave me back a list with the names and addresses. This is not guessing. They went through every single name. They said 340,134 people. That's 1/3 people were removed from the rolls wrongly, that they still live exactly at their voting address. Overwhelmingly, these are voters of color. And I'm just looking at one state, and I did this in Wisconsin. I asked the Amazon people to look at the people purged in Wisconsin. 130,000 were facing a purge. And they said, well, about 35,000 of these people. And again, they weren't guessing. They're giving me the names and addresses of each and every one of the people wrongly removed. And in Wisconsin, swing state, they said 1/3 of the people removed from the voter rolls still live at their voting address. And guess what? I worked with the Washington Post, and they did a map for me, and they showed that the people removed wrongly from the voter rolls, almost every one of them were in one of two places, either Milwaukee, the black voting precincts of Milwaukee, and it was an exact match. We had a map, exact match. Black voters in Milwaukee were removed from the voter rolls, and students in Madison, Wisconsin. Did that make the difference in Wisconsin? Likely, but I don't know. I'm right now. I'm going to tell you again. I'm a reporter. I can't. Without the states are hiding these facts. I actually have had to go to federal court to get this data.
Wow. So he's talking about spoiled ballots, which is, it's not readable. We can't count this. We need to throw it out. He's talking about voter roll purges. Oftentimes, depending on the state, if there's a little mistake, you put the date in the wrong place, or you put your middle initial when you shouldn't have, or you don't put your middle initial when you should have. There's all these reasons to spoil the ballots, toss the ballots. There's all these voter roll purges. There's, according to him, provisional ballots, a lot of them not counted at all. So this is more the highfalutin argument of rigged election. It's more of a voter suppression argument than it is Elon Musk, Starlink, changing the votes type argument. So these are a whole bunch of different arguments that are being presented. Look, from my perspective, the Starlink thing, I think highly, highly unlikely. A lot of the voting infrastructure is not even connected to the internet, right? So that wouldn't make much sense. This is sort of like the Mike Lindell argument that he made, like, it was all the, this county was stolen, and then you talk to the county election official, and they're like, we're not even connected to the internet, and he's claiming it was stolen on the internet. That doesn't make sense. So the Starlink thing is highly unlikely. But this is more the highfalutin argument as to, with little, cut corners here and there, little tweaks around the edges, a little bit of voter roll purge, a little bit of throw out the provisional ballots, a little bit of spoiling more ballots than you should, and boom, how many does that add up to? Now, to be fair to him, he's saying, I don't know, right? And he's saying, I can't tell you unless I actually have the hard data and the exact numbers, whether or not this stuff would have made the difference. But here's my controversial take on this. I could not care less that liberals are doing this, because Republicans just spent 4 years denying the results of the last election wrongly in their case, because there were 60 plus court cases that were thrown out oftentimes by MAGA judges. You had the Arizona audit, which went back through the votes, and they found out not only did Biden win, he won by more than what he thought he won by on election day. They broke it down 79,000 ways, and they were just wrong. They were just wrong about that election. But they just spent 4 years denying the last election, and there was literally zero political price to pay for it. It didn't hurt them in any way, shape, or form. If anything, you could argue maybe helped them. That Trump literally ran on it this time, kept saying he won, convinced a large number of people in the public that he won, and he ended up winning again, right? And so if there's zero political price to pay, and it's like people want liberals and Democrats and leftists to fight with their hands tied behind their back. Like, you need to abide by all the rules and the regulations and the decorum and the civility and do everything right and dot every I and cross every T. And then the Republicans get to be foaming at the mouth psychopaths and get away with everything and then eventually still end up back in power. So from my perspective, let them cook. Let them cook. I want to see the same amount of passion and anger and vitriol and unhinged arrogance coming from liberals and leftists and Democrats as we see from Republicans on a regular basis. Because what we're used to for so long is when they go low, we go high, and we're the ones who are so, we do everything just right, and we're the teacher's pets, and we make sure that everything is on the up and up, and everything is perfect, and then you get your eyes spit in on a regular basis. And so I don't see any downside to these conversations. I don't see any downside to the TikTok liberals even going with the most insane, unhinged kind of conspiracy theories. I don't see a downside. It's going to be hard to get me to care. And by the way, the second the Republicans and, the right-wingers online start going after, liberal election deniers, election deniers, I don't give a fuck what these people have to say. I don't give a fuck about their criticisms of liberals and leftists and Democrats. They've been wrong about everything consistently, year after year. They've been absolutely unhinged and arrogant. They've paid no political price for it. So now, if you want to get a little taste of your own medicine and fight a side that doesn't have their hands tied behind their back, go right ahead. Now, I don't think this changes the calculation as to what the Democratic Party has to do moving forward. I think, regardless of what the reality is here, Democrats still need to have an ironclad narrative. Trump has his narrative. Fuck the immigrants, they're the problem. Fuck the Hollywood cultural elites, they're the problem. You need to counter that with the correct narrative, which is the problem is the billionaires and the corporations and the super PACs and the lobbyists and the special interests and the big money donors. They're the ones who've rigged our government, and that government represents them. It doesn't represent you, regular people. Democrats need their narrative, and they need to embrace a bold agenda that helps people. You need to embrace social democracy and universal health care and social security for all and ending the corruption and ending the wars. So it doesn't change that part of the analysis, right? And even in a scenario where you argue that these people are correct, well, then it's our turn to make it too big to rig, right? It's our turn to get so many people passionate and go into the polls that no matter what kind of trickery they do, nothing can stop us, right? But again, go ahead. Let them cook. Let them cook. I want to see foaming at the mouth, insane, unhinged, arrogant, angry liberals and leftists and Democrats. And look, the undeniable lesson of what happened with Trump is being divisive doesn't hurt you. Being arrogant doesn't hurt you. Being unhinged doesn't hurt you. Trump was going around talking about Arnold Palmer's cock. Trump was going around saying Mike Tyson should get in the ring with Kamala Harris. He was talking about immigrants eating pets and cats and dogs. Being unhinged and divisive is not a liability in any way, shape, or form. So forgive me if I'm not wagging my finger and being pissed off at liberals and lefties and Democrats for getting a little unhinged on their own. If they want to do that, God bless. I have no problem with it whatsoever. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.